Sadly, Stephen, I think we're all realizing that as much as it's brilliant news that we've got a vaccine in the system here in the world and here in South Africa, it isn't the silver bullet. There's a lot of things that have to happen before we can say that COVID is behind us. And so we probably need to be thinking that even with a vaccine, we are going to be experiencing disruption for most of this year, at least the first half of this year, before we can trust that the vaccine is having an impact on society. And of course, that means that all of the disruptions we were getting used to, not necessarily in a good way, last year are going to continue into this year. And I think that that's especially significant. I mean, just the conversation you were having with Nedlank now is important. Who gets priority? What impact does it have on which sectors of society? We're going to have to learn to live with disruption, unfortunately, for some time still.
I mean, obviously there are other places that are sort of ahead of us in terms of the vaccine rollout. Now, in some ways, people might say they've taken a bit of a risk, but someone needs to go first. Two places really are probably far ahead of other places. The one is the United Kingdom, the other is Israel. What are they showing us at this stage? What's the scientific data saying?
Well, look, of course, Israel have nearly completed what I like our president's label for it, population immunity rather than herd immunity. They've nearly completed that process, obviously got a much smaller population group, and they're only focused on a certain aspect of their country as well. And what they are seeing is immediate effects in terms of a drop-off on infection rates, a drop-off on hospitalization. But even from Israel, who seem to have done the best so far, it isn't an immediate drop-off. And everybody is still being asked to be careful, keep physical distancing, keep their masks on, because you still don't know who has had the vaccine. We're not carrying around vaccine cards in our hands or little badges to say we've had it. And even then, the vaccine is only a certain percentage effective. And you don't know whether you might be in the 5 or 10% of people for whom it's not effective. So even in a country like Israel, and then as you say, I think the UK is probably, you're right, sort of second on the list behind them. I think if I've got my numbers right, they are now up to 12 million people vaccinated. The good news is the vaccine seems to be working. It's not having any adverse effects. It's now just a process, Stephen. We've got to take the time that it takes, which is weeks in those countries and months everywhere else for the vaccine to be effective. We've got to encourage people to take it. And only, I think, in the second half of this year will we have any chance of getting back to, I don't think we're going back to normal, but I think we're going to at least be able to open up parts of our country and society that are closed at the moment.
Obviously, we want to look at what are the variables that could upset this particular schedule. And I can think of two. One is an unfortunately typically South African fight over who is in line, who is not in line to get vaccines and when. That's the one thing. I mean, the last thing we need is someone to consult a lawyer. The other thing, of course, is the variants and the mutation of the virus. Viruses do mutate. We don't yet know exactly how the variants are going to have an impact.
Well, luckily, we do know that the current variants, and the 3 of them we're looking at, they've been labeled for the countries that found them, South Africa, Brazil, and the UK. It does appear as if all the existing vaccines are going to be effective against the current variants. But we know that viruses will mutate, and we're going to have to keep an eye on that. At the moment, there's good news there. Yes, there are going to be fights about priority, but honestly, I think that most governments are fairly clear about that priority order, at least for the first list of priorities in healthcare workers and frontline workers. I think you've got 2 other issues, Stephen, that we need to keep an eye on. The one is people who are vaccine skeptical. I'm not talking about complete anti-vaccine people. There are a small percentage of those, very vocal, but small percentage. The other group of people who are just saying, I don't want to rush into this. And I think we've got to work really hard to listen to their questions, answer their questions, and encourage those people to get the confidence they need in order to get involved in the vaccine program. We need about 70% of the population to be vaccinated. Otherwise, it doesn't really matter. The vaccinations won't work after that. So that's our task, I think, in the next few weeks and months, to convince people the vaccines are safe and effective, and as many of us as possible should be taking them as soon as we can.
Graeme Codrington, the futurist from Today, Tomorrow Global, I really do appreciate the time. Thanks very much indeed.